One of the largest problems facing us today, a headwater issue, no matter what your work is, no matter whether you're in business, government, education, nonprofit, ministry, you have a headwater issue that there are four separate generations smashing against each other, all seeing things their own way. Whenever you speak a word, whenever you say anything, four generations will hear that word very differently. Think about it this way. If I said technology, four generations just heard something very different. If I say leadership, four generations heard something different. If I say ministry, or the church, or the kingdom of God, all of those things, different generations are defining them differently. And where this has now become a major issue in our culture is that we don't talk the same language, so it's hard to build relationships in that environment. And so this teaching, this opportunity to sit and talk with you a little bit, if you are in Christian leadership in any part of our workplace, this is designed to give you insight into how God sees that problem and how God solves that problem. And He has a manual for you specifically to solve that problem that maybe you didn't realize you had. I get a chance to speak all over the world on this topic, and one of the things that's interesting is a few years ago I heard myself saying, this is the first time it's ever happened in history, four generations smashing against each other. And God put me in a bit of a headlock and said, that's not true. This has happened once before. It's happened before, and I have a manual in the Bible where I can show you exactly what to do right now. The Bible speaks in Deuteronomy and Joshua in four generations. They're working side by side. And if you understand how to read that story and run it through the filter of today, then all of a sudden now you know what to do. In Chronicles, there's a group that was distinguished at that time called the Sons of Issachar. And in Chronicles it talks about the Sons of Issachar knew the times they lived in and they knew what to do. The question is, as a Christian leader, do you know the times we live in and do you know what to do? This teaching, this Generation Joshua teaching, is designed to open your eyes up to God's Word and how it addresses the biggest problem that you and I are facing right now. Four separate generations working side by side. What do I mean by that? Well, if you look at Deuteronomy and Joshua, the setup is that the children of Israel have come out of Egypt and they're getting ready to go into the promised land. Moses is leading them into the promised land. And what's interesting is that you in Deuteronomy and Joshua have four generations that are sitting there looking at each other. And if you look at what they were doing at that time, you'll know what to do depending upon your generation. Now in the story, children of Israel come out of Egypt, and that generation, it said, had a slave mentality. And it walked right up to the promised land, and it just didn't believe that they could do it or that God would do it for them. They walked out of Egypt and they walked right up to what was promised to them, and they said, can't do it. So they wandered for 40 years. They go in a circle for 40 years. And God said that He had to kill off a generation that had a slave mentality and raise up a generation that had a conqueror's mentality. But what's interesting is that in Deuteronomy, we drop in on the story at Moses, the end of Moses' life. And if you look at what was happening there, I think you're going to see exactly what you can do and what I can do in today's culture and how to address the four generations depending upon which generation you are. So let me walk you through this. There are four separate generations right now in our culture. Traditionals were born right before 1946. Boomers were born roughly between 1946 and 1966. Gen X, my generation, those of us born between 66 and 1981. And millennials that were born between 81 and 2000. All of us are in the workplace today, smashing against each other, all wanting it our own way. And each one of us is represented in the story in Deuteronomy and Joshua. Now let me walk you through this. If you're a traditional that's watching this right now, you're of that Moses generation. Moses knew that his runway was getting short. He knew that he was not going to go into the promised land. God had told him, you're not going in, and you're going to die on this side of the Jordan River. But what was Moses doing in the last days in Deuteronomy and Joshua? He was educating the masses, and he was investing in the one. He was telling everybody, this is what a lifetime of following God looks like. This is what I've learned. Hey, when you get into the promised land, remember this. Don't forget this. He was educating the masses, but he was investing in the one. He was saying, Joshua's my guy. Joshua's my guy. Joshua's my guy. He is who I am going to impart leadership on. So if you're a traditional today watching this, your job is to be a Moses. Your job is to tell a younger generation what it's like to follow God. What is it like to be faithful over years and see highs and see lows and experience failure and come back from that? And what does that look like? As Moses was doing, because your runway is running short. You may not get to this place, but you can certainly impart what you know into other generations, as Moses was doing. Now, what's interesting, when Moses picks Joshua and says, that's my guy, he skips Caleb. Now, wait a minute, hold on. If you know the story, there were 12 spies back here in the story that go into the promised land to kind of scout it out. And 2 come back with a good report. Hey, we can do this, Joshua and Caleb. 10 others say, oh man, there's giants in the land. We can't do that. And that's what caused the 40 years of wandering. Well, what's interesting is, why did Moses skip Caleb? Why did he not say, here's my guy? I believe that Caleb represents boomers. Boomers were born between 46 and 66, largest generation ever. And what's interesting about boomers is that Satan has sold a lie to this generation, that if you build your kingdom big enough, if you build your bank account, or you get your name on the building, if you do it in your own strength, then you can conquer. And that's a lie. And as God did with that generation that came out of Egypt, he had to kill off a generation that had the wrong mentality, a slave mentality. He had to raise up conquerors that would do it his way. And what's interesting about Caleb is he's one in a generation. And I will tell you that I've had a lot of boomers that have wanted to mentor me. And their definition of mentorship was taking 80% of what I made. That's not mentorship. That's called extortion. See, what's interesting is that when there is a boomer out there that will invest in a younger person and pour into them with no strings attached, you're one in a generation. You stand out like Caleb did. But here's what's interesting. Instead of complaining about that, what did Caleb do? Caleb said, I will put myself under a younger person's leadership, Joshua, but I will take the hardest part of the equation. When he goes to Joshua, he says, hey, when we get in the land, give me the toughest part of the equation. Give me the hill country. I want the giants. I was ready 40 years ago. I'm ready now. He knew that Joshua didn't know how to do certain things, the hard part of the equation. And so he said, give it to me. I'll take it. If you're a boomer watching this, maybe, just maybe, it's not your job to lead and run the group into the new place. Maybe your job is to put yourself under a younger person's leadership, but to take the hardest part of the equation. And what would owning that be? What would that be like to go and conquer a land knowing that you took the hardest part of the equation? See, it doesn't get dull. It's not second fiddle. It's not JV team. That's exciting stuff. And I believe that just like Caleb, that's where life is for a boomer generation. If you're listening to this and you're a boomer, I encourage you to be a Caleb. Don't be one of the ones that died off with the wrong mentality in the desert. Well, then we get to Joshua. Joshua represents Gen X, my generation, what I would call the reluctant leaders. Isn't it interesting? Joshua grows up coming out of Egypt. He sits at the feet of Moses every day. He learns from Moses. And he fights these battles. He's kind of the captain of the army, and he's an amazing student of leadership. And yet Moses says, this is my guy. And Moses says it and God says it, be strong and very courageous. And they say it over and over and over. And they impart that, be strong and very courageous, be strong and very courageous. I am sure, like many of us in Gen X, that Joshua didn't seek out to be the leader of this land and to be the one that takes everyone in, but he found himself in that spot. It's fascinating. Joshua sees two partings of water. He sees Red Sea, he sees Jordan, he sees battles won in the most miraculous fashion. He gets a battle plan to go and take a walled city and use trumpets to knock the walls down. That's not your typical battle plan of that era, right? Or any era. And yet he does it and he sees it. And then it says after they fight the Battle of Jericho, the next battle that they fight, the Battle of Ai, they lose a number of guys. They lose 30 or so men because of the sin of Achan. Achan goes in and he does something God told him not to do. He takes a gold wedge and a robe, and they lose the next battle. And watch what Joshua does. He comes apart at the seams. He falls face down in the desert and says, I should have died in the desert. Oh, why in the world did all this happen? Here's a guy that saw all of that, heard God said, be strong and very courageous, heard Moses say it, saw two miraculous partings of water, and he comes apart when this defeat happens. That's me. That's my generation. Knowing that we've been called to leadership, to lead in places that we didn't really seek out, and when things go wrong, going, man, what am I doing here? How did this happen? I didn't really seek this out. And if you look at what God says to Joshua, he says, hey, get up. Get up. Come on, let's go. I've got the plan. You're still my guy. Let's go. If you're in Gen X, you got to realize you're the reluctant leader. You're in positions of leadership you probably did not seek out, but God's calling you to lead. Now here's what's crazy. Caleb and Joshua are two guys, just two guys. And they lead hundreds of thousands with a conqueror's mentality into the land, to take the land, it says, to clear it out of unrighteousness. And if you read the story as they go in Joshua, you see that they're clearing out all the ites, the Hittites and the Jebusites and the termites. I mean, all the ites are being cleared out of the land. And I believe that today's Gen X, as a Joshua and as an army that's going into the land, that we're to clear out the isms, humanism and secularism, and all the isms that are a part of our culture that own these pieces of land that are promised to God's people. And our job is to take the land for God, doing it His way. What's fascinating to me too is as you watch the children of Israel go into the land, it says they have a conqueror's mentality. They've been walking in a circle now for about 40 years. Not quite a circle, but they're basically going around and around in the desert. Now they go into the land. And isn't it interesting that millennials, those born between 81 and 2000, have a conqueror's mentality? If you're a millennial right now, I guarantee you that you know in your DNA that you're supposed to change the world. You know it. The lie the enemy is trying to sell you is that you've got to do something big, huge, to change the world. You got to discover the cure for cancer, be a rock star, be an amazing all-star athlete to change the world. No. You can change the world doing exactly what you're doing right now. Whether you're in class, you're working a job, you're starting a family, you can change the world right now because you have a conqueror's mentality. It's been wired up by God, preordained. You are a conqueror. Right now, millennials make up the largest cohort in the workplace. Soon, it will be as much as 70+% of the global workforce. Millennials, you are moving in with a conqueror's mentality into this land. The question is, are you going to do it God's way? Look through the book of Joshua as he goes and fights these battles, as the children of Israel fight these battles. Every single battle has a different battle plan. It's never the same. God says, hey, in this city, I want you to do it this way. In this city, I want you to kill these folks off, but you can keep this. This city, take it all out. What I think God's saying to us today is that I'm calling you into a land as a 4-generation opportunity right now. Knowing your role, knowing that I want to conquer this, that traditionals, that you have taken them this far, and that you are passing the baton right now, and your job is to educate, but to pick those that you want to entrust and to say, be strong and courageous. You are my baton that I am passing along. It's going to you. Boomers, your job is to say, without ego anymore, I have to be in charge. Rather, you can say, maybe there's a younger leader that I have got to take the hardest part of the equation from to go and conquer the land successfully. Gen X, you're the reluctant leader. You have got to understand your role, that you are called to be strong and very courageous. To say, as Joshua said, but for me and my house, we're gonna choose the Lord. You can do it your way. This is how we're going to do it. To set the example for a generation who wants to conquer. And if you are a millennial today, you are preordained, pre-wired by God to take the land, to have impact, to change the world. But you've got to do it the way God says to do it. You can't do it in your own strength or by yourself. You have to do it as an army. So, in a 4-generation workplace right now, where everyone is struggling with what do we do with all these generations, now God's equipping you to see what to do. What is your role? What are some of the roles of those around you of different generations? You've now been given the Generation Joshua download. You've been given insight into what God has through His Word as a battle plan for today, knowing what to do and how to do it, knowing the times we're in and knowing what to do, just like the sons of Issachar. So if you want more of this, if you want to go deeper into this and you want some actual tools and training on this, then we have designed a course just for that. And you can click on the link that's going to be provided so that you can get to that. So if you want to go deeper and really build strategy and have the skills to do those types of things. But whether you do that or not, I want you to understand God is pointing you to His Word, specifically Deuteronomy and Joshua, for the times that we are in and to know what to do. So my prayer is that you would take this and start to see yourself and your role in the way that God has ordained it to be during this time frame. I want to wish you all the true success in the world, and I thank you for giving me this piece of time to consider this amazing concept. Thank you.